Welcome to The Authentic Path, where we explore the intersection of leadership, performance science, and ancient wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Vanessa Calderon. I'm a Harvard-trained physician and healer with over 20 years of leadership and business development experience. I blend science and ancestral wisdom with proven strategies to help you get the results you desire in work and in life without losing yourself along the way. Let's get started. Hello, friends. Welcome back to The Authentic Path. This is your go-to podcast for learning how to live a life that's more authentic to who you are, really coming home to yourself so you can live and lead with purpose, with integrity, and make a big impact in the world without burning out. Today, we're going to talk about something that often, I think, gets the rap of being something soft. But I think it's actually one of the most important tools and actually one of the most important medicines that exist. And, I've been doing this work now for a long time. I have about 10 years of work in sort of this human development space. And I'll tell you, I'm also a physician. And if I could prescribe one thing universally to everybody, one thing that I know would probably solve a lot of their problems, that one thing would be self-compassion. And that is why we're diving deep into self-compassion today. So what we're going to talk about today is what self-compassion is, what it's not, and then how you can start practicing it today. And next week, we're going to talk more about just very specific, tangible, easy tools that you can start incorporating in your already super busy day so that you can become more practiced with self-compassion. Okay. So why does self-compassion matter to you? I think for a lot of us that practice it, we might even think we're good at it. And I'll tell you that for me personally, I thought that I had self-compassion because I just didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know that I was critical with myself because I wasn't connected with myself. I didn't have conscious awareness. I wasn't aware of the negative self-talk I had. And the more I practiced self-compassion and the more I got to know self-compassion, the more I realized, holy smokes, this is something that I definitely needed in my life. And this matters to you because you listening, you're high functioning, you're ambitious, you're a highly, what I call just like a highly effective human that wants to do good things in the world. And for people like you, like me, like us, we want to build meaningful things in the world, and we lead teams. We lead movements, we start businesses, careers. And that means that for us, we're often putting ourselves out there in spaces where we're going to get criticized, where we're going to get feedback, where we need to perform well. And that can feel sometimes not very good if we're not practiced. So that's what we're going to jump into today. So let's just start with what is self-compassion? Okay, so self-compassion is defined by the following three things. And these three things come from Dr. Kristin Neff. Dr. Kristin Neff is the most well-researched, well-published researcher on self-compassion. So the three things she says is number one, self-kindness. So self-kindness instead of self-judgment. What is self-kindness? Self-kindness is exactly what it means. It means speaking to yourself with the same level of kindness that you would speak to someone that you cared about. I'm going to give you an example. So self-kindness is let's say your kid comes home and doesn't do well on their math test. There's two ways to approach that. One can be with criticism. How did you not do well? What's wrong with you? What happened? And not even what happened, but what's wrong with you? Are you an idiot? Like that kind of talk versus meeting it with kindness. Oh my gosh, I see that you didn't do well. Tell me what happened. Be curious about it. What can we do for you? Can we offer you a tutor? That's self-kindness versus self-judgment. And you can imagine just listening to those two examples, which one would somebody respond better to? Okay, the second is common humanity. And this is common humanity instead of isolation. I think this one really matters. Common humanity is the concept that we are all human. We have a shared human experience. And that shared human experience means that suffering is universal, that everybody suffers, that nobody, when they show up in a human body, took some sort of oath to say like, I'm going to be immune of suffering. I am the one person that's not going to suffer. No, everybody suffers. And so I want to name that because I think that's one of the most important things when we are struggling to remember that suffering, struggling, that's human experience. Everybody has that. Because when we isolate ourselves and when we have ideas like, I'm the only one that's suffering, That creates shame, that creates judgment, and that's the opposite of self-compassion. And then the third one, so first is self-kindness, second is common humanity, and third is mindfulness. And this is mindfulness instead of over-identification. Over-identification is the sense of us exaggerating what we are experiencing. Let's say that you had an outcome that you didn't like. Let's say you had a patient outcome you didn't like. Instead of saying the patient outcome was not ideal, that's mindfulness, versus I am a bad doctor, it's my fault, I shouldn't have done it that way. That's over-identification. So mindfulness means acknowledging the suffering, the pain, the circumstance without exaggerating it, without suppressing it, but just noticing it objectively. That's the most important part there. Compassionate mindfulness. So self-compassion is not self-pity. Self-compassion is not this overindulgence. And self-compassion does not mean that you lower your standards of excellence. I think that's really important here because I work a lot with really high functioning, ambitious folks. And so many of us, myself included, I wasn't taught this verbally, but more by example and by what I saw was that in order to get ahead, I needed to be hard on myself. I needed to push myself. And that's just sort of what I learned. And the reason why that matters is because our brain is hardwired to have a negativity bias. That means that 5 to 1, so 5 times out of 1, our brain is going to latch on to the negative. And that's just biological wiring. It's wired that way because it keeps us alive that way. So one of my favorite teachers would say, your brain is like Teflon for the good, but Velcro for the bad. And that is so true. Because if you think about it, and you think about way back during our cave people ancestor days, if there was a poisonous berry and they went to eat the berry and got sick, you wanted to remember that. But if you had a delicious berry and you ate it and it was delicious, that's great. And you didn't necessarily need to remember that because you could go weeks without eating. But if you ate a poisonous berry and died that day, your life is complete. Your life is done. And because the human brain is wired to be so incredibly resilient and to keep us alive and do it as efficiently as possible, it is not wired to be compassionate. That is something we need to practice and something we need to teach ourselves over and over again. And another reason why that matters today is because we are not walking around with the same stressors that our ancestors had. Especially if you're listening to this, you likely have a roof over your head. You likely have heat, running water. You likely have a refrigerator full of groceries. You don't have to worry about where you're going to get your next meal. So we're not dealing with the same life-death stressors that we've had before, but our brain is still wired that way. So the more that we can train our brain to be kind to ourselves, to be compassionate to ourselves, the easier our success is going to be. And I haven't shared this yet, but one of the things that's actually tied to long-term success is actually compassion. I have a podcast episode earlier, I'll link it in the show notes, where I talk about how important it is to be compassionate to yourself and how your success actually increases. All markers of success increase the more compassionate you are to yourself. So I'll link that in the show notes. But suffice it to say that the more compassionate you are to yourself, the kinder you are, then the easier it's going to be for you to take really big risks. And the more risks you take and the more you put yourself out there, the likelier you are to grow and to do bigger things. So self-compassion really, really matters when it comes to your success because it won't just feel better. Your success won't just feel better. It will also be easier. There's a lot of research to show what happens to our minds and our bodies when we practice self-compassion, which is other great reasons to practice self-compassion. These are going to be super obvious. Like none of this is going to come to a surprise for many of you. But number one, when we are more compassionate with ourselves, we're less anxious. Why? Because we can catch that negative self-talk and we can calm it down. We can notice that self-talk because we're practicing mindfulness, because self-compassion, the third pillar, is mindfulness. We can catch that and we can notice it with objectivity instead of letting ourselves wrap around it and to tell ourselves, oh my gosh, it is true. I did stink at that. I was the worst. I did fail, and let ourselves go into a downward spiral. When you can catch it ahead of time, it lowers your anxiety and your depression. Self-compassion is also linked to greater emotional resilience. Of course, if you have something that you didn't do well in, but you're kind to yourself, it's going to be easier for you to bounce back. Resilience means the ability to bounce back from a negative situation, like to be a little rubber bandy. And you're going to be able to do that more when you practice self compassion. We also have increased life satisfaction and more sustainable motivation that lasts in the long term whenever we practice self compassion. And one of the things that I think is the most important here is that the more compassion we have for ourselves, the kinder we are to ourselves, the kinder we are going to be able to be for other people around us. And I think that's really important. There's this really, I can't remember who said this, or maybe nobody said it and I just made it up, but there's a really important premise, which is you can only allow yourself to be loved as deeply as you love yourself. And I just think that's so important. You think about relationships where there's just so much deep respect and love. It's because one person deeply respects and loves themselves. So, of course, that's what they're going to expect from the other person. Respect and love. Just the way they respect and love themselves, they're going to expect people to respect them and love them that way. The same thing with compassion. The more compassionate you are with yourself, the more you're going to be able to be with people around you. I'll tell you, for us, my marriage, when I started practicing more and more self-compassion, holy smokes, our marriage got so much better because I was more compassionate with myself and kinder to myself. So I was able to hold more compassionate space for my husband. And that is just a beautiful relationship to be in. Can you imagine if the friendships you're in, the relationships you're in, your marriage, for example, if the space people hold for you is compassionate space, so you can show up and you can say, man, that really stunk. And instead of them trying to solve your problem for you, they just say, wow, I'm so sorry. Or you want to talk about it? Like, that is just so beautiful. That space of self-compassion, it's priceless. And that's what you're able to offer others when you have that for yourself. I want to talk about the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion, because there's a subtle difference here. And self-esteem, a lot of people listening to this podcast have. Self-esteem, and that's what I used to have when I thought I had self-compassion. It wasn't self-compassion. What I had was self-esteem. So they're both essential for living long, healthy lives and mental well-being, but they operate differently. So self-esteem is this sense of your own worth or value. You have a high self-esteem when you're doing things that are well because it's dependent on external factors. So if you are always achieving, you probably have self-esteem. If people are always approving of you, you probably have a high self-esteem. But high self-esteem will boost your confidence. However, on the flip side, it's conditional because it's only high when you feel like you're doing well. And it requires external validation because it requires that approval. And that is something that a lot of us get to work through and really, really untangle. The sense of my worth is related to somebody else valuing my worth or validating my worth. That's a really important distinction because so many high achievers have tied their sense of self to external validation, where they only feel like they can feel good about themselves if other people are telling them that they're doing a good job. The other thing about self-esteem is that it's comparative. It often involves you comparing yourself to somebody else. And so it causes feelings of either superiority or inferiority. And I think that's so important because most of us walking around, we're good people, big hearts. We don't assume we're superior to others. Sometimes we think we're inferior, but we give ourselves a pass. If we think we're inferior to others, we give ourselves a pass. We think that's humility. But I'm going to tell you, if you assume you're inferior to other people and that's just humility, deep inside of you, you have to be superior to somebody else. Because if you buy into the story that you're inferior, it means that somebody else is superior. So I just want you to sit with that for a little bit because there's a other side to every coin. And the other side to feeling inferior is that you must feel superior to somebody else. So just sit with that. So that's self-esteem. And if you think about self-esteem is okay. It's important to have. However, you need to decouple that from your own sense of worth and your own sense of self. And that's where self-compassion comes in. Because self-compassion, in contrast to self-esteem, is unconditional. It doesn't depend on your achievements. It doesn't depend on somebody else's opinion of you. You can love yourself. You can be kind to yourself. You can meet yourself with what it is that you need, regardless of what other people are thinking, regardless of what you created out in the world. And that is so important. The other thing about self-compassion is that it's really supportive for you when you are being challenged during challenging times. If you experience a failure or a disappointment, for example, or you experience somebody that criticized you or gave you really harsh feedback, you can meet yourself with self-compassion, and that really allows you to hold yourself high, hold yourself with love, and that's beautiful. Self-compassion is also intrinsic. It comes from an internal source versus self-esteem, which is extrinsic. Self-esteem is outside of us. It's what we're doing outside of us, our achievements, what people think of us. Self-compassion is internal, it's intrinsic. So in essence, self-esteem is about feeling like you're good enough in comparison to other people, while self-compassion is about being kind to yourself, regardless of what other people think, regardless of your achievements. And that's just really beautiful. It's really sustainable. And it's a beautiful foundation for resilience, for well-being, and for really big success in the world. I think hopefully I've made you a believer as to why self-compassion matters. And if you are doing big things in the world, if you're leading anything, leading a family, leading a team, leading a business, one of the things that's really important that is going to set the tone for your success and for the people around you is your nervous system. It's how you show up. When I say nervous system, what do I mean? It's the energy that you're carrying, the energy that you hold. So for example, for folks that have not practiced self-compassion, the tone that you normally set is your normal tone. And sometimes that can be self-critical inside your brain. You're trying to show up with kindness, but inside you're criticizing yourself or you're criticizing your teammates. And that creates a sense of tension. Whether you're speaking those words or not, the energy will be tense energy. So why is that? Because self-criticism turns on the same exact mechanism in your brain as the human stress response, the threat response. What is so fascinating about the human stress response and the reason why it works so well and why it's kept us alive for centuries and centuries, again, remember, part of the thing that we're born with is the primitive. We have three parts of our brain. One part is the primitive brain. The primitive brain has been with us for 60,000 years. It's the part of the brain that our ancestors had before we had a fully developed prefrontal cortex, okay? So that part of the brain works so well. It's so efficient that the second that we sense any sign of danger, it turns on right away. Turns on the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and tells our body to react to stress. Danger, danger, stress. So that's the fear response, okay? It's primarily started by the amygdala, that part of the brain. Now, that part of the brain is so hardwired and is so effective that it's kept us alive for so long. But the other thing of it is that it's a very immature part of the brain. It cannot tell the difference between actual fear, like my life is actually in danger, an actual threat, versus a perceived threat. A perceived threat is like somebody's yelling. Your life might not be in danger because your kid won't eat their peas, but your kid is yelling and your stress response turns on. The same thing happens when we are critical. When we are self-critical, we're talking to ourselves negatively. We have that negative self-talk. It activates the same part of the brain's threat response. When it does that, turns on our, again, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, secretes cortisol at the end, a stress hormone. The stress hormone travels through our body and tells our body to react to stress. And when we're in that threat mode, the parts of our brain that we actually need to think critically, to think, creatively, to solve problems, that part of the brain shuts down. And all that's on now is the parts of our brain that are making us instinctive and reactive. That's a problem. So there's this super awesome psychologist that I love. Her name's Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. And she has this theory called broaden and build theory. And what it shows is that when we can practice self-compassion, so when we can harness kindness and we can really calm down that threat response when something bad happens, when we can meet that bad experience with kindness or a positive emotional state, what it actually does is it broadens our cognition. So our ability to think critically, our ability to be more creative. And of course, that builds long-term psychological resources for us. So it's pretty awesome. Self-compassion. So if you think about it, when you're working in teams or even with your own family, self-compassion is going to create a sense of psychological safety, both for you, but for people around you. Why does psychological safety matter? Psychological safety, so that what that term means is essentially like you are safe in your mind, because I told you that the brain's threat response will turn on for a perceived threat. Your life is not in danger, you're totally safe, but your threat response turns on. So psychological safety is telling your brain, no, I'm actually safe. Even though I know around me I'm safe, there's nothing around me that's going to hurt me, I might still not feel safe internally. Psychological safety is telling me, it's giving my mind and my body, my nervous system, the signal that I am safe. That's what self-compassion does for us. It creates psychological safety for us internally. So it helps us regulate our threat response. And it does it for our teams, because if I'm feeling safe and one of my team members does something or we get a bad outcome in our team, I'm not going to yell or scream at them. I'm just going to be like, that's not great. What can we do to fix it? So when you create that internal safety for yourself, you're more capable of creating it externally for the people around you. So oftentimes what ends up happening with especially high functioning, high achieving people like all of you listening is that when we don't have self compassion and we have a problem, so something happens at work and we have a problem, we think the solution is to work harder. Let me overwork. If I'm starting to feel inadequate, let me overwork to try to like fix this inadequacy feeling. I think overworking is going to solve that. I think that's so fascinating. Or if I show up to a room and I'm new and I need to prove myself, what do I need to do? I need to talk really loud, or I need to always have an opinion or prove somebody wrong. Those are all signs that we are not meeting ourselves with self compassion, because the opposite is I show up and I feel like, oof, I feel inadequate in this room. Okay, let me notice that. Let me be kind to that feeling of inadequacy. Let me just name the fact that, okay, I feel this old feeling showing up of inadequacy. That's okay. It's okay. Doesn't mean it's true just because I have it. What happened there? I met it with mindfulness and I met it with self kindness. That's what's possible when we practice self compassion. So, we talked a lot about self compassion. I talked a little bit about what's happening in the brain. I just want to give you a few other sort of nuggets of what's happening in the brain when we practice self compassion, kind of like the neuroscience here of self compassion. So I mentioned that it helps us regulate our stress response. So self-compassion is linked to emotional regulation. Emotional regulation means our stress response turns off, and instead of us reacting to that, we are able to calm it down and we turn off the human stress response, which is so important because that means we turn off all the circulating stress hormones because we don't want those hormones running in our body. The other thing it does is it turns on something called the caregiving system in the body. The caregiving system in the body is our sort of parasympathetic nervous system, our relaxation response. It's what allows us to be calm. Studies show that self-compassion reduces our fear center, the amygdala, and turns on the ability for us to be calm, because there's two hormones that are released when we practice self-compassion. One is oxytocin. So oxytocin is the same hormone that is secreted when a mother is bonding with a new baby. So when they start to bond, oxytocin is released, which creates a sense of intimacy for both the mom and the baby. And it also promotes milk letdown so that the baby can it provides nutrients to the baby. The other thing it does, self-compassion, is it stimulates release of endorphins. Endorphins are things that are secreted in our body that are natural pain relievers. So we feel better when we practice self-compassion. That's pretty awesome. So we're not just able to think more critically. We're not just able to be more creative. We also feel better. We're kinder to ourselves, and it creates a sense of, okay, I'm safe. Okay, so I hope you're a believer. We talked a lot about self-compassion, why it really matters. And I'm going to give you a few practices today of how to practice self-compassion with your teams. And then next week, we're going to talk about how to practice self-compassion for yourself. So the reason why I want to talk about it with teams is because a lot of you listening, you manage people, whether that's your family that you're managing or actual teams that you're managing. And self-compassion itself is not just something personal. It's actually something that can be used with teams, because we think self-compassion must be self for me. But when you practice it for yourself, you're actually able to extend it out to people around you. There's a psychologist, her name is Dr. Amy Edmondson, and she did some research that showed that when teams have practices of self-compassion, it creates psychological safety. And when they have psychological safety, they are able to be more successful. So their year-end results improve. So year-end profit margins improve. So, and how do we do this? We do this with leaders who model self-compassion, because what that does is it reduces the stigma around talking about how you feel, around being honest. And that is so important, because what you want is you want your team members to be able to come to you as soon as something isn't going well so that you can help fix it. They either fix it for themselves, but if they're noticing they can't fix it, you want to know about it so you can help them fix it. And in cultures, I coach, and one of my clients is this big Fortune 100 company. And I was brought in because their culture wasn't very good. It wasn't very transparent because they had a big fear-based culture where nobody could ever fail. And it was creating really bad results because they needed to be honest. Because if things aren't going well, somebody needs to say, okay, let's fix this. But nobody ever wanted to raise their hand because they were afraid of the backlash. So how can you start creating self-compassion for your teams? Okay, number one, when you begin a meeting, you can start with just check-ins. Start with an honest check-in. How are people doing? How was the holidays? I call them warm openers. So just start with something warm and honest and let people be honest. And you start as an example. Like, man, if the holidays were hard, name that. If they were great, name that. And you want to normalize discussing setbacks as learning. So if somebody mentions something that is not going well, then you want to create space for that. You want to say, yeah, that must be tough. I'll tell you, the first time I had a boss once, and he wanted me to do this big thing that I thought in my mind was big and scary. He wanted me to create this really big program, and X number of people needed to be there, and it felt really big and scary. And I was like, oh, and so I said out loud, what? There's no way. Like, what if it doesn't work? What if it fails? And his response was the most calming, like co-regulating response. He's like, oh, no, then we just won't do it again. Well, no big deal. We just won't do it again. And that, like, normalizing the fact that, like, it's okay to try and it's okay if it doesn't work. Holy smokes. It allowed me to have the psychological safety to go out and do something really big. So normalizing, discussing setbacks as learning, like, what can we learn from this? As opposed to like, what were you thinking? You made a mistake. And so you want to make sure that you're able to, again, warm openers creates connection, and you normalize any sorts of setbacks as learning. The more you are kind to yourself and the more people witness you being kind to yourself, the more they're going to be able to be kind with themselves too. The more they're going to believe that it's safe to be kind to themselves. Because when you're harsh with yourself, even if you're not harsh with yourself in front of them, but just you have that tone, like I always have to be successful, it comes off as being really controlling, as having to have your hands in anything. Those are fears of failure. That's like being led by fear of failing. When you have that fear of failure, people feel it. It's a vibration you're creating, and people are going to sense that. It's going to resonate with them. It's going to make them afraid to fail. It's going to make them feel like they need to be super like controlling and all of those things. So just know that the more you practice this for yourself and create this resonance, the more people are going to feel that around you. And that changes cultures, because a compassionate culture is going to outperform a culture of shame or a culture of fear 100% of the time. Okay, friends, we talked a lot about self-compassion today, and I'm going to leave you with this. Self-compassion is not about becoming soft or lazy or weak. In fact, I think self-compassion is one of the biggest muscles we can have, one of the bravest things we can practice. And again, I said this at the beginning, but if I could prescribe one medicine that is the most effective medicine for so much of what I'm experiencing in the world right now and so much of what I help my clients with, it would be to practice self-compassion. Because self-compassion is about becoming steady, becoming kind. It's about leading with wholeness instead of fear, and really building businesses and lives that don't require you to be so hard and critical on yourself along the way, but instead to meet yourself where you are, to give yourself what it is that you need to be successful. And for all of you listening, you mission-driven folks out there, for those of you that are here to create an impact in the world and to really make a difference, this is foundational, because again, the relationship you have with yourself is going to set the ceiling for everything you create. All right, next week, we're going to jump into a bunch of really simple, practical things that you can do to start practicing self-compassion in your own life. Because I know you guys are incredibly busy. You don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to give you really tiny, small practices that are incredibly effective, that really work, that you can start integrating immediately to create more self-compassion for you. All right, sweet friends, I'll see you next week. Hey friends, if this episode resonated, please take a quick second and leave a review, share it with a friend, or post it to your community. It's how we keep helping others who are walking a similar path, and how together we grow the movement of consciousness in business, leadership, and life. Thank you again for being here, and I'll see you next week.